How are you, ladies and gentlemen? Can you believe that we are already here doing a week 1 preview of the Bulls regular season? We are just 2 ways away from Bulls tipping it off in Detroit for their first game. Now, if you're new to the channel, first of all, welcome. But last season, I previewed at the start of every week the Bulls schedule of games, things to look out for, keys of the week, and my record predictions for that week, which last season, most of my weekly predictions turned out to be wrong, so hopefully that won't be the case this year, as you would hope that this team would be a little more consistent and predictable. But anyway, in today's video, I'll be breaking down the Bulls' first week of games and what to expect in each of them. So what's going on, everyone? You were listening to Bulls Central here. Hope you're all doing well. Guys, real quick, if you missed my last video, I was very fortunate enough to have our own Bulls insider and NBC Sports Chicago reporter in Rob Schaefer on the channel as we discussed the Bulls' latest roster moves, reviewed their preseason and season expectations of the Bulls. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. I'll leave it linked in the description for you guys. Also, because we're about to start a new season and we've had a lot of new people in the channel recently, consider subscribing, as about 63% of you watching are not subscribed. It would mean a lot to me, and in return, I'll be covering the Bulls all season long with post-game videos, interviews with guests, and other Bulls content. Now, let's talk about this upcoming week of games. So obviously the NBA, the season does in fact start tomorrow with a handful of games, but the Bulls' first game will be happening on Wednesday in Detroit, and they will be coming back to Chicago to play in their home opener on Friday against the New Orleans Pelicans, and then they take on the Pistons again the following day in a back-to-back to close out the week. And when you look at the schedule in these first 3 games, you have to think this is an easy opportunity for the Bulls to start off the season strong for the first time in years. I mentioned this in a prior video, and it pains me to say it, but if the Bulls can win their first game of the season, they will be above 500 for the first time since 2017, back when the Bulls still had Jimmy Butler. So let's start with this first game where the Bulls will open up their season on the road in Detroit. Now, Detroit, for the most part, is expected to be one of the worst teams in the league this season, given they are still rebuilding after buying out Blake Griffin last year, trading away Derrick Rose. And the good thing for Detroit is that they got very lucky in the draft lottery and landed themselves the #1 pick, which secured them a potential generational talented level player in Cade Cunningham. So I do suspect the Pistons will be slightly better than they were last season. However, at the same time, I don't expect them to finish any better than 13th in the East, and I wouldn't be shocked if they finished last in the East. Now, the good news for the Bulls is that the Pistons' #1 pick in Cunningham will likely be out of the lineup on Wednesday, and even possibly for the second game on Saturday, as he's currently listed as day-to-day. And the same goes for Pistons' second-year player and former lottery pick in Killian Hayes. For the Bulls, at least at the time of this recording anyway, surprisingly do not have any players out of the lineup due to injury, aside from Coby White, of course. Patrick Williams is expected to play after recovering from that ankle injury that he suffered shortly before training camp, and we got to see him in limited minutes in that final preseason game against the Grizzlies. So for this game against the Pistons, I mean, this should be an easy one. The Bulls have to take care of business and not only win this game, but really winning it handily. I mean, if you look at the Pistons roster, yes, they have some nice pieces with Cade Cunningham, Sadiq Bey, Jeremy Grant, but come on now. The Bulls are significantly better than this team top to bottom. I mean, the Pistons, this team is essentially what the Bulls roster looked like a couple years ago, with a few nice pieces, but overall, they were not a good team. And with the star level talent that the Bulls have and the depth that they have coming off the bench is unmatched compared to what the Pistons have. I would say the biggest guy to watch out for is Jeremy Grant. In my view, he's the Pistons' best player until Cunningham proves otherwise. He's a lengthy and athletic combo forward who can play the 3 or 4. He can score in a hurry, rebound, and plays decent enough defense. So I imagine that Patrick Williams likely will be guarding him most of the night. I think the expectation of Patrick guarding the opposing team's best players, which we saw a lot of last season, will remain also in this season as well, especially considering the Bulls' big 3 aren't the best defenders and will likely be focusing more on offense. So as long as Patrick can stay on his game in taking that defensive assignment of guarding Jeremy Grant, who is really the only threat for the Pistons, then the Bulls should be in good shape. And honestly, even if Grant balls out and puts up 40+ points, which I believe he did in a game against the Bulls last season, it's still not going to be enough to beat this Bulls team who can outscore the Pistons and win in a shootout any night of the week against any team. I mean, really, the Bulls should be able to beat a good amount of teams just in a shootout, even if the defense isn't up to par, simply because they have that offensive firepower in the starting lineup. But I think with Patrick guarding Jeremy Grant, who's really the only threat on the team, as I mentioned, and no Cunningham, the Pistons are simply just no match for the Bulls. And that's not even being biased. That's just a fact. You look at the matchups between these two teams. Josh Jackson is no match for Zach Lavine. Kelly Olynyk or Luke Garza, they don't even compare to the level of player that Nikola Vucevic is. And as much as I like Saddiq Bey, he's no match for DeMar DeRozan. So again, I think this should be an easy season opener win for the Bulls. But again, we have been surprised before in the Bulls sometimes playing down to their competition. But this is a whole new Bulls team, a more experienced team, and let's hope we don't see some of the same mental lapses that we saw last season. Then the Bulls will be taking on the Pelicans on Friday for their second game and home opener. I can't wait to see what the energy and atmosphere is going to look like at the United Center that night. If it's anything like we saw in the preseason, then we can expect the stadium to be jumping. Now, for this game, it is likely that Zion Williamson will be out of the lineup for the Pelicans, as about a week or so ago, it was announced that Zion will remain out of the lineup and be reevaluated in 2 weeks' time. And even though by Friday, it'll be around that 2-week mark, that's just when he'll be reevaluated, not ready to go and be back in the lineup. The Pelicans also did add that there is not a timetable for his return. So the Bulls kind of lucking out in these first 2 games with no Cunningham and no Zion both being out. But either way, this is going to be a fun one because we got to see this team a little in the preseason in which the Bulls dismantled them, but the level of play will likely be a little bit different in a regular season game. And also Brandon Ingram will be available to play for the Pelicans, whereas he wasn't in that preseason game. And I think because it's Lonzo Ball's former team, Garrett Temple and Tomas Satoransky also be returning to Chicago, the fact that sign and trade continues to be investigated will make the game all but a little more drama filled. But really, the keys to this game for the Bulls is simply ensuring that they lock up Brandon Ingram. I mean, the fact that they don't have to worry about Zion enables them to double up on Ingram, making sure he doesn't get any easy looks, because even though he had somewhat of a down season last year, the guy was an all-star the prior year, a most improved player of the year, and can light it up in a hurry if you're not too careful. I mean, even for a quote-unquote down season, the guy still averaged near 24, 5, and 5 on pretty solid efficiency. And then, of course, the other guy to watch out for is Jonas Valanciunas, who I personally think is one of the more underrated big men in the league right now. His strong scoring ability, but also being one of the best rebounders in the game, especially on the offensive boards, averaging over 4 offensive rebounds alone. Vucevic has to be fighting for those rebounds a little bit harder than he's probably used to in this game, and not allowing Valanciunas to give the Pelicans second chance opportunities. And this is actually something Vucevic struggles with, but it's getting out and actually guarding Valanciunas on the perimeter, because Valanciunas doesn't take that many threes. He only averaged 1 3 per game last year, but he can hit them at a decent rate, averaging near 37% from 3, which he did last season with the Grizzlies. It's generally one of the bigger criticisms of Vucevic's game is his ability to get out and defend the perimeter against bigs who can shoot it from outside, but then also being able to cut back into the paint on a drive. And then I also wouldn't sleep on Devontae Graham. I mean, Graham was more or less a consolation prize for the Pelicans after losing Lonzo and then losing out on snagging Kyle Lowry. But Graham is a decent player who averaged over 18 points per game with the Hornets before LaMelo Ball arrived, and was a most improved player of the year candidate in that season. He's a solid point guard, not as good as someone like Lonzo, but you have to keep an eye on him and make sure that he doesn't get hot in a hurry either. But with the Bulls adding Lonzo, I mean, you can always rest a little more comfortably going into a game that has a high volume scoring point guard, because you know that Lonzo is going to be all over his man and making sure he's contesting every shot and pestering him when he's playing off the ball. Not something the Bulls had the luxury of last season when playing against quality point guards when we had Coby White in the starting lineup. I love Coby, but he's not a sound defender. And then, of course, the Bulls close out the week at a back-to-back on Saturday against the Pistons yet again, and really, there isn't much else to add other than what was already said for the first game. If anything, it should be a bit easier, considering the Bulls are actually going to be playing at home for the second game. It is possible Cunningham could be available by Saturday, which could impact things somewhat, but I still think with a strong defender like Lonzo, I'm not really too worried about a rookie who has no experience in the NBA on a bad team somehow just overtaking the Bulls just by himself. So as for my predictions for this week in terms of the Bulls record, I mean, you factor in that the Pistons are going to be one of the worst teams in the league, and the Pelicans, although better than the Pistons, they're still not going to be that great. And without their best player in Zion, they're not going to be able to compete with the level of talent that the Bulls have. So in my view, I think this should actually be an easy sweep this week. The Bulls starting out the season going 3-0. Let me know what your guys' predictions are for this week, and if there are any keys or callouts you think that I missed that the Bulls need to be looking out for against the Pistons and Pelicans. Let me know in the comments. Tomorrow I'm planning on putting out a Bulls season hype video that I've put together for you guys, so be on the lookout for that. As always, be sure to subscribe if you're a Bulls fan, as I do post daily Bulls content. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and I will catch you in the next one.